I wanted to start off with your story. Do you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Okay, yeah, of course. So I'm Anmol. I'm the CEO, co-founder of Nospharma. I've been working on rare disease therapeutics for 3 years at Nospharma, and before that I was a neuroscientist studying rare disease, genetic types of rare disease, specifically neurodevelopmental conditions. I do not have a pharma background or an industry background. This is my first company that I spun out of McGill, and this is technology that I actually was not working on, but my co-founder was developing. And then I have also previously worked between my graduate degree and starting Nospharma. I went to business school. I attended Queen's. And I also work at District 3 as an entrepreneur in residence, working with other biotech and biopharma companies at the early stage that are spinning out based on research technologies at universities.
Amazing. And could you tell us a bit more about what you were doing in between your first degree, business school, and studying Nospharma? How was your time at District 3?
It was very good. So I did a couple things. I used to work at the MUHC. I set up during the COVID years after I finished grad school. And before I went to business school, I actually was setting up their COVID rapid testing platform when we all had to go get tested, particularly for high-risk patients in long-term care at the hospital. And then I joined D3 after I finished my business degree, and I actually worked with Steph, coaching a lot of the early stage founders to develop their business models based on types of technology that they had been working on, typically in the healthcare and biotech space. So that could be anything from I have a drug therapy and I don't know what to do, to I have a software for a specific thing and I don't know what to do. I want to spin it out and develop a company around it.
I'm just curious, how long did you work with each of those companies? Was it, like...
Pretty short.
Okay.
Pretty short. Like, I only work with them for the period of the program, which is about 2.5 to 3 months. And then they go on to work with more specialized people in their space who could support them on the next steps of their development journey.
Amazing. So after that, you worked with your co-founder and spun out something from McGill. Could you tell us a bit more about Nospharma, the molecule, what you guys are developing right now, and the current stage?
Yeah, so we are developing a drug combination therapy for a condition called Fragile X. Fragile X is a rare neurological condition that affects about 1 in 4,000 kids born every year worldwide. And these kids will have a lifelong set of symptoms ranging from difficulty with learning, with speech, with motor problems. And this was a condition I was studying in grad school, but my co-founder was developing a combination therapy, so 2 drugs that we put in a single capsule to treat Fragile X. And he developed it in the lab, did some preclinical studies on it, and then we actually decided to spin it out from his lab and commercialize it as Nospharma.
Gotcha. And could you walk us through the licensing process? You said it's a combination therapy. So what did that look like? How did the conversations go with McGill? And what was kind of like the timeline and the process for that?
So before I got involved, there was IP filed around the discovery, around the invention at McGill. And actually, someone who funded at the time our IP is in the room, Adrian, an organization called Neurosphere inside McGill that funded some of the early stage development. And so McGill filed IP and paid to develop that IP. And then a license is our right to use that IP in a commercial way as a company. So that happened once I joined. And that process took, with McGill, about 2 years. So we negotiated a license for 2 years with McGill before signing. And that was fundamental for us because without access to said license, we actually do not have the right to develop said technology. So 2 years, and I think... And the most important part I will tell you about that is that the license has to be exclusive in our space. It means that McGill cannot license said technology to anyone else. It is only ours to develop.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of diligence goes into figuring out which asset was worthwhile pursuing from McGill? So you said like the IP was already filed. You know,
Yeah.
is that a chance that you're taking on the asset, or was there research that you had to do before that within the 2 years?
Okay, so in the ideal world, if I was a well-funded investor or a well-funded pharma company, I could pick and choose the type of technology I want and go to universities and say, who has the best Fragile X tech? I was really just a grad student who spun out with very specific knowledge in this disease space and a belief that it was the right solution for the condition, right? So as much as I'm taking a chance on the technology, the university is also taking a chance on us and our ability to develop it. Because if from their perspective, they also have to think about, well, could we just sell this to a big pharma who has money, who has an incredibly stacked team that can do this in a way that maybe Nospharma can't? So it's a partnership, it's a give and take. So unfortunately, we didn't have the luxury of shopping around because we were just two co-founders spinning out a tech. If we had cash, we would definitely shop around. I would still choose our drug combination therapy, and that's simply because we chose a de-risk strategy to market. We chose two drugs that previously had clinical data, which was a huge advantage for us, did not have any safety or toxicology issues in patients previously, and we knew they would actually correct a disease-modifying deficit in the condition. So it was strategic on our part to commercialize it in this way.
Gotcha. And right now, considering the current stage that your team is in, what does your day-to-day look like when it comes to figuring out the commercialization and just the plan going forward when the science is still, not necessarily fully figured out?
Yeah. So in pharma, the science is really like what we call proof of concept in medical devices versus other spaces. The true proof of concept is that your drug works in patients. Of course, you won't know that until you have a lot more money, because running clinical trials in pharma is a lot more expensive. So day to day, we have functions in business development. We have a team of 6 that functions in regulatory. We have someone who functions in preclinical design of what's called the IND package. The IND is investigational new drug, the clearance that the FDA gives you to actually run a clinical trial. So a lot of work goes into that. We have a clinician working with us, and all of those people are basically gearing up our strategy to the next milestone, which is for us IND clearance, and then the milestone after that, which is a phase 2 clinical study in Fragile X patients. So they all are gearing towards design of that clinical study, etc. So my personal day-to-day is actually none of that, but all of that. My day-to-day is actually fundraising money. It's managing that team. It's knowing every component that that expert brings. My head of regulatory is a regulatory expert in Fragile X. I picked them and hired them with that knowledge. They have a track record of success getting a clinical study through to phase 2 clinical trials for Fragile X. But they're not the CEO of a company. They don't worry about how to finance that study. They do not worry about the details associated with managing a team and everyone's perspective. So my job day-to-day is management and fundraising.
Got it. So when it comes to those milestones that you're working towards, I guess my question is twofold. You said your main focus right now is on the fundraising. What does it take for people to take your call and for you to generate interest in that fundraising? And then second, for the other partnerships that you need for the developments, the IND, the phase 2 trials, what kind of milestones, metrics, data is important at your current stage? Yeah, we can start with the fundraising. I guess like when you're...
How do people take my call?
Exactly, how do people take your call?
It kind of varies. Cultures differ. In the US, you kind of have to hustle to get a call. You have to be there in person or get a really nice warm referral. So often my effort is involved in not cold outreach. I don't do a lot of cold outreach. I find it low success. It's usually getting people to introduce me. That's what most of my time is spent doing, getting people to introduce me to someone who will at least give me some feedback on the program we're developing. Usually that is already a huge win, because getting honest feedback is pretty hard from funders, especially VCs. So that's a strategy for usual. Canada's it's a bit easier because we all tend to know each other, who funds, and all the companies know who funds. So you can kind of pin them down at typical conferences. And your next question was around milestones going forward.
Exactly.
So milestones going forward are actually something we validated with VCs and with pharma partners. So we have been speaking to pharma partners about the development pathway for this therapy for 3 years. We meet with them on a recurring basis. We meet with about 40 to 50 companies every year to ensure that they are, one, interested, and two, to ensure that we are following a development path that makes sense for them, and the stage at which we understand the stage at which they would actually want to either acquire us or partner with us to move us forward. So we've been developing the milestones backwards. In parallel, you also have to validate with funders, usually later stage investors, and get their perspective on the milestones. So actually our milestones were developed backwards. That's the strategy I chose to do, which was fundraise after I knew from the later stage investors and acquirers what exactly they wanted. So for us, the two core milestones over the next 3 years are IND clearance, approval to run that clinical study in patients, and then, of course, actually executing that study and getting a readout of the results of our drug therapy in that patient population.
Right. When we spoke earlier, you mentioned that a lot of your developments is happening outside of Canada. Could you tell us a bit more about how that kind of came to fruition and why you chose the locations that you currently did?
Yeah, so we hired a head of corporate development with a lot of pharma experience based out of Philadelphia in 2023, who is basically a co-founder. I mean, he's been with us from the beginning, really. And we opened an office in Philadelphia in 2024. And then, of course, dynamics changed at the end of 2024 between US-Canada relations. But at the end of the day, we will be absolutely working cross-border. I mean, there's no way for pharma companies or most companies building or aiming to achieve global impact for patients that are not thinking in a global way. You might have to change how you go about implementing that global strategy, but we remain very committed to working cross-border. So myself and my co-founder remain in Canada, but we do have a full-time US-based person working on business development in the US with all the big pharma companies. And I, though I don't travel as much, I do travel to the US sometimes.
Got it.
Yeah.
Makes sense. And I kind of want to shift gears a little bit.
Please.
So with your background and what you're building right now,
Yeah.
would you be able to elaborate on some of the hurdles that you face as a first-time developer of a biotech company, especially in the rare disease space?
Yeah.
Are there any hurdles that you feel have been unique to your journey?
Oh God, there've been so many hurdles. Yes, of course. Hurdles can range from financing. Those are the easy ones. I mean, I can tell you it's hard to get money. It's hard for everyone to get money in building a company, right? So let's just take that at face value and then move on to something more interesting. Maybe a hurdle that is interesting is navigating hiring a team. As an early stage founder, especially with a small team of 2 when we started, you have to be very selective about who you let in, because everything you develop is like just you. So you have to choose based on skill set and fit for your team. And we have a team of 6 now, but like it was not. We didn't choose very easily. It was very carefully thought out who would join our team, and based on skill set. I was very picky about people's experience. I am a young first-time founder with a research background and a business degree. That does not make me necessarily the best candidate to lead a pharma company. And I know that. I mean, I know investors, of course, weigh that when they make funding decisions. So my strategy has been to surround myself with people way smarter than me. That was the most important thing for me. I needed to be around people who I could make sure I learned something from. Because if I felt like the smartest person on my team, then I have not surrounded myself with the right people.
Out of curiosity, who was your first hire?
It was our head of corporate development. His name's David Baker, and he's the former CEO of 2 NASDAQ-listed companies. He took them public. And he is a former Fragile X founder, so he has actually built a Fragile X company. He was basically retiring, and we said, join. So, but that was a 2-year relationship. That was a 2-year relationship to make sure we could work together before we committed, for him as well.
Yeah. I wanted to close this out with rapid fire questions, and
oh boy.
Your last topic was actually the first rapid fire question I had. Why Fragile X? And I'm aware that you were researching it before Nospharma as well. I guess, like, what was your interest in that space?
The interest was really, around studying. I'm a basic scientist, so I was really studying the mechanisms that drive particular types of conditions, so genetics in this case. So the interest started from that. Since then, it's definitely changed, because in my space, I engage a lot with patients, and that's not something, and I think we should, looking back, in science, you don't actually engage with a lot of patients. In pharma, I engage with patients all the time and their families. I go to patient conferences and interact with patients. I interviewed patients with Fragile X and their families to understand what exactly are they looking for in a therapy, and if they're looking for a therapy. Because it sounds obvious, like, why wouldn't parents want a therapy for a condition? But it's not always you shouldn't always take it for granted, because they have lived experience in dealing with symptoms of a condition. So it started from a scientific interest, but it's definitely become more of a clinical interest over the years, my interest in Fragile X.
Gotcha. The next question I had was...
This was supposed to be rapid fire.
That's okay. You're good.
I'm so sorry.
The next question I had was about any beliefs that you have that most of this room might disagree with when it comes to biotech, if any. Any controversial...
They're controversial. I'm just not sure anyone would disagree necessarily. Maybe they will. We are bad at funding in Canada.
Yeah,
that's not controversial. We don't like to say it, but like, we have an exodus of companies leaving Canada all the time, every day, every year. And we like to display metrics that kind of contradict that. But like, for example, we like to fund later stage companies in Canada, though not really. We kind of prioritize later stage funding. It's just, we don't have a lot of money for pre-seed and seed stage funding. As in my space, I'm only speaking about my space. I won't speak on everything else. But what that means is, when you want to fund the later stage companies, if you haven't funded enough early stage companies, you will run out of later stage companies. That's kind of the state we're in biopharma and biotech. So I'm not sure how controversial that is. But as Canadians, we're so polite. We really don't like, maybe saying a harsh truth. And I think we'll have to examine that a little bit more carefully if we want to survive and build our own internal therapeutics, and not just therapeutics, but other biotechs too.
Yeah, I don't think that's controversial at all. Actually, I think the gap is there for sure.
Yeah.
It's more so for pre-seed, but I think it's across the board, and it's definitely not only the life sciences. And then my last question for you is there anything in your space, in your company, that you're excited for that you want to share?
Yeah, we recently signed a strategic partnership with a strategic foundation called Fraxa, who's validated and built a standardized model for testing any drugs that are coming for Fragile X. And they partner exclusively with you to actually test your drug in preclinical models and they validated their models with the FDA. And it's a huge win for us because every company that has previously gone to clinic and been acquired in this space has used this platform. The FDA views this as a validated, standardized platform, and they are, of course, agreeing to both do the work and fund the work for us. So that's a huge win for us.
That sounds amazing. And with that, we're going to take a Q&A. Does anyone have any questions for Anmol?
I know that you're still in the clinical trial and conception of the medication, but down the road, eventually you'll have to deal probably with insurance approving that medication to pay, especially with a Canadian Quebec environment, with an environment so different from the US and the private insurance.
Yes.
Do you have any opinion about that?
Do I have any opinion about it?
I mean, not personal opinion, but like you're seeing, obstacle or challenging for your company?
Oh, no, I mean, Quebec actually has a rare disease strategy, and pricing is different in Canada versus the US, but you negotiate with RAMQ versus a private insurer to negotiate that pricing, so not concerned of it at all. You do need, you need the US market, you need larger markets also to be able to maintain pricing across the board and enough of a revenue stream, but that's not unique to rare disease. That's actually unique for all pharma. Any market any pharmaceutical will require you to access larger markets to be able to also fund the smaller markets. So,
Any other questions?
I'll ask one. So what stage are you at in funding and how big is your round? You didn't hear how much you're raising and what?
yeah.
I know there's some investors in the room.
Thanks, Steph. So we are raising we're at the seed stage. We're raising a $2 million USD round. I'm hoping we close a little more, as always. We have a lead investor committed, potential second lead in the works. We have about 40% of that round committed, and we are hoping to close out the round over the next month. That's my hope. We've been working on that round for a bit, and that round will take us to IND clearance for a phase 2 clinical trial in Fragile X. So not a phase 1, and if anyone wants details on why, that's actually fundamental to our clinical development strategy.
Okay, with that, I wanted to thank Anmol. Could we give him a big round of applause, please?